She carried 2 days of cooking in her hands and walked out the door with a plate she'd earned. Nobody stopped her. Nobody called her back. That moment, quiet, devastating, and witnessed by exactly the wrong stranger, changed everything in a town that thought it already knew her place. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. Subscribe and stay until the very end, because Maddie Bell Carter is just getting started. The supper had been Maddie's idea from the beginning, though nobody would have said so that evening. It was her hands that had driven the knife through 40 pounds of beef the morning before, trimming fat, scoring the meat down to the bone, the way her grandmother had shown her before the old woman's hands gave out. It was her fire that had burned low and steady through the night, keeping the Dutch ovens hot, without scorching the way only someone who understood heat, who had learned to read it the way other women read faces, could manage. It was her sage she had pulled from the dry hillside at dawn, rubbing the leaves between her palms until the smell of it was everywhere, working it into the gravy, while the rest of the Carter household was still asleep. 2 full days. 2 days of her labor, her skill, her body aching from bending over the long iron stove in the July heat, sweat soaking through the back of her dress before the morning was half gone. She had not complained. Maddie Bell Carter was not a woman who complained. She was 27 years old, heavy-set and strong-shouldered, with chestnut brown hair braided back beneath a faded cream headscarf, and hands that were rough from work she had never been paid for. She wore a brown cotton dress that had been washed so many times the color had gone soft at the seams, and a white apron over it that had started the morning clean. By the time the Carter family sat down to supper, the apron was stained with grease and berry juice, and the particular honest grime of a meal made from nothing into something. She had set the table herself, filled the water pitchers, sliced the bread into even rows the way her Aunt Eleanor liked, carried the roasting pan in both arms from the kitchen to the long dining table, setting it in the center where the steam could rise and hit everyone's face at once the way a proper harvest supper should open. And then she had stood at the edge of the room, wiping her hands on her apron, waiting for someone to tell her where to sit. The table was full. It had not been full when she left the kitchen. In the time it had taken her to carry in the last of the dishes the Carter family had arranged themselves, Eleanor and her husband Frank at the heads, their daughter Clara, between the 2 cousins from Laramie, the farmhands who worked the Carter land wedged in tight on the bench seats, every space occupied, every chair claimed. There was not one empty seat. Maddie stood there for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough for Eleanor to look up from her place at the table head and catch her eye. Eleanor smiled, not a warm smile. Eleanor Carter had not offered a warm smile in the 12 years Maddie had lived under her roof, and she was not about to start now. Oh, Maddie. She said it the way you might say, "Oh well," with a small practiced sigh that did all the work without dirtying the hands. There simply isn't a chair that'll hold you dear. You know how it is. Why don't you take your plate outside? You'll be cooler in the yard. Clara glanced up from her plate and then back down again, the ghost of a smile working at the corner of her mouth. The cousins from Laramie looked at their food. One of the farmhands, a young man named Deke, who had eaten Maddie's cooking 3 times a week for 2 years, stared at his hands. Nobody said a word. Maddie looked at the table. At the food she had made. At the faces that had been eating it for 30 seconds and were already reaching for second helpings of the biscuits she had hand-rolled at 5 in the morning. Then she picked up a plate from the kitchen, filled it herself, and walked out the front door into the blazing July evening. The heat outside was a different kind of heat than the kitchen. The kitchen heat had work in it, purpose, something to push against. The yard heat was just weight. It pressed down from the white Wyoming sky and bounced up from the packed dirt and sat on her shoulders like something that had always been there and never planned to leave. There was an overturned feed crate near the fence post. Maddie set her plate on it, found another crate to sit on, and sat down. She ate. She did not cry. She had learned long before that crying only made Eleanor feel powerful, and Eleanor Carter did not deserve any more power than she had already taken. So Maddie ate her beef and her gravy and her biscuit in the dirt yard of the Carter ranch, while the sound of forks and laughter drifted through the open windows, and she watched a dust devil spin itself into nothing at the far end of the fence line, and she did not cry. She was halfway through the plate when she heard hooves, a single horse moving at an easy walk up the cart road from the south. Not in a hurry, not the sound of trouble, just a rider who knew where he was going and had no reason to rush. She didn't turn to look. Company arriving late to a Carter supper was not her concern. The horse stopped near the gate. She heard the creak of saddle leather, the particular sound a large man makes, stepping down from a tall horse and then boots on the dry dirt, coming her direction. Still, she did not look up. She was eating, and she would finish what she had cooked, and she would not perform embarrassment for a stranger who happened to ride in at the wrong moment. The boots stopped a few feet away. "Evening, ma'am?" The voice was low. Not soft, there was nothing soft about it. But it was even unhurried, the kind of voice that was accustomed to saying what it meant and not much else. Maddie looked up. The man standing at the edge of the yard was the largest person she had ever seen in her life outside of a circus advertisement. He was at least 6 feet and 3 inches tall, possibly more with the kind of build that came from decades of physical work. In hard country shoulders, wide as an axe handle, was long arms that strained the seams of a sleeveless brown leather vest, hands that looked capable of snapping a fence rail without great effort. His skin was sun-darkened deep, the kind of brown that came from years of riding above the tree line, where the sun had nothing between it and you. Long black hair, thick and straight, pulled back loosely. A full beard, close trimmed, framing a face that was blunt and angular and entirely expressionless. He wore leather trousers, a wide belt with a knife at the hip, leather bracelets on both wrists, and a rough cord necklace with something small hanging from it that caught the evening light. A mountain man's outfit, practical and heavy wrong for this heat, and not seeming to bother him in the slightest. He was looking at her plate. Then at the feed crate she was sitting on. Then at the open door of the Carter house, from which the sound of supper conversation floated out into the evening air. His face did not change expression, but his eyes did something. They went very still. "That food inside smells like good work," he said. "Thank you," Maddie said because there was nothing else reasonable to say. "You make it." "I did." He nodded once slowly, as if she had confirmed something he had already suspected. Then he looked at the house again, then back at her. "Is the woman outside family?" he said, "or servant?" It was not asked the way most men ask things, with already the answer tucked behind the words waiting to be agreed with. He asked it straight the way a man asks who needs to know. "Family," Maddie said. "Technically." He studied her for another moment. Then he turned and walked through the front door of the Carter house without knocking. The room did not exactly go silent when Caleb Rourke walked in, but it came close. He was the kind of man who changed the dimensions of a room simply by entering it. It was not just the size of him, though, that was considerable. It was something else, the absolute stillness he carried, the way he moved through space, like he had never once in his life been uncertain whether he belonged somewhere. Eleanor Carter looked up from the table head with the practiced smile she kept for strangers. "Can I help you, sir?" "Caleb Rourke," he said. "I had business with Frank Carter regarding the timber boundary up near the Bell homestead. Rode down from the mountains today." Frank Carter, a nervous, slope-shouldered man who had always let Eleanor manage everything, including him, half rose from his chair. Yes, we were expecting you. Please sit down, Mr. Rourke, there's—" He looked at the table. There was, in fact, no seat. "There's always room," Eleanor said smoothly, already calculating, already glancing toward Clara with the particular look that meant this man is single and solvent. "Sit up straight." "Ma'am," Caleb said, and he turned back toward the door. "Before I sit anywhere." He paused in the doorway. "The woman outside. She cooked this meal." A silence landed on the table. "Maddie." Eleanor made a small dismissive sound that was not quite a laugh. "Oh, she doesn't mind the yard. She prefers the air. You know how some people are, they like their solitude." Caleb looked at Eleanor Carter for a long moment. "No, ma'am," he said. "I don't believe that's what I saw." He walked back into the kitchen, found 2 clean plates, and loaded them both from the serving dishes that had been left on the sideboard, the extra portions the ones meant for second helpings, the ones Maddie would never have taken for herself. He picked up both plates and walked back out the front door. Clara Carter was on her feet before he cleared the threshold. "Mr. Rourke, please. There's plenty of room inside. We can move the bench." "Miss," he said without slowing, "I appreciate it." And he walked out. "No, Maddie heard the door again and looked up, and he was coming back across the yard with 2 heaped plates and a canteen hanging from his belt, and the expression on his face was exactly the same as it had been before. Unhurried, unmoved, entirely settled in whatever he had decided. He handed her the second plate. "You've been eating off half a portion," he said, glancing at what was left on her original plate. "That's not right for the person who made it." He sat down on the ground near her crate. Not beside it, there was no room for a man his size beside a feed crate, but near enough that they were clearly in the same conversation, clearly at the same meal. He set his own plate on his knee and picked up a fork like he ate supper in the dirt all the time, and found it perfectly satisfactory. Maddie stared at him. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know it," he said. He took a bite of the beef and chewed it slowly, and something in his face shifted, not dramatically, just a small movement around the eyes, the kind of involuntary response a person makes when food is genuinely better than they expected. "This is real cooking," he said. "What'd you use in the gravy?" "There's something underneath the sage." Maddie looked at him for another moment. Then slowly something in her chest eased, not all the way, not close to all the way, but enough. "A little dried thyme," she said. "And I scored the bone before I roasted it, let the marrow run into the drippings before I built the sauce." He nodded. "That's why the depth is there. Most people just brown the flour and call it done." He looked at the biscuit. "These hand-rolled at 5 this morning. 5 in this heat. The kitchen was cooler at 5, she said. By 7, it wasn't fit for working." He ate in silence for a moment. Not the uncomfortable silence of a man who had nothing to say, but the comfortable silence of someone who understood that food like this deserved to be eaten with some attention. "How long have you been cooking for the Carters?" he asked. 12 years, Maddie said. He didn't respond to that immediately. He broke a piece of biscuit, dragged it through the gravy, and ate it. Then he set his fork across the plate and looked at her with those level, still eyes. "You always eat outside." She did not answer that directly. "When it suits them," she said. He nodded once. He looked toward the house. Through the window, she could see Clara's face at the glass, watching the pale oval of it, the particular expression of a woman recalculating. "The Bell homestead," he said. "You know it." Maddie's spine went straight. "That was my grandmother's land," she said carefully. "Margaret Bell. She passed 11 years ago. The property's been sitting empty since," he said. "East 40 acres, Spring Creek running behind the house. There's a timber and water boundary dispute between that land and the Carter property. That's why I'm here. I leased the mountain section to the north, and the boundary markers haven't been clear since a flood moved the creek bed 3 years back." "The Carters manage the Bell homestead," Maddie said slowly. "They've been managing it since Grandma Margaret died." "Managing," he said, and something in the way he said it made the word sound like a question. "That's what Eleanor told me," Maddie said. He looked at her. Then he looked at the house. Then he looked back at her. And there was something behind his eyes. Not pity, not sympathy exactly, but the careful, deliberate expression of a man who had just understood something important and was deciding whether to say it. "When did you last go out to that homestead?" he asked. Maddie thought about it. "Eleanor said it wasn't worth visiting, said the structure was unsound." "I've ridden past it twice this summer," he said. "Structure looks fine to me." The biscuit in her hand had gone still. She was no longer eating. From inside the house came the sound of Eleanor's laugh, practiced carrying the kind of laugh designed to travel, and then Clara's voice higher chattering about something, and the men agreeing with things they didn't care about because Clara Carter was pretty and expected to be agreed with. "Mr. Rourke," Maddie said. "Caleb," he said. "Caleb." She said it once, testing it. "Why are you out here truly?" He picked up his fork again, but he didn't eat right away. He looked across the dry yard at the fence line at the late light, catching the top rails at the heat shimmer, still rising off the packed earth, even as the sun dropped toward the mountains. "Because I've been riding alone for 20 years, he said at last. "And I know what it looks like when someone's been made invisible by the people who ought to see them. And it makes me angry." He said it quietly. He did not perform. The anger did not raise his voice or set his jaw or make any of the gestures a man makes when he wants you to admire his feeling. He just said it plain the way he'd said everything else. Maddie looked at her plate. "You don't know me," she said. "No, ma'am," he agreed. "But I know what you cooked, and I know where I found you, and those two things together tell me most of what I need to know." Inside the Carter house, Clara had positioned herself at the window 3 separate times in the past 15 minutes, and each time she had come away with the same uneasy feeling settling further into her stomach. "Mama," she said quietly, pulling Eleanor into the kitchen. "He's still out there." "I can see that," Eleanor said. "He hasn't come back in. He's just sitting with her, in the dirt, Mama." "Clara." Eleanor straightened the lace at her cuff, a gesture she used when she was thinking fast. "Go out there. Take him a piece of the apple cake. Be pleasant. Tell him it's cooler inside now the evening air has moved through." Clara smoothed her dress. She was 22, dark-haired and slim, accustomed to getting what she wanted from men without having to work very hard for it. She picked up a plate of apple cake, fixed her smile, and walked out the front door. She came around the corner of the yard and stopped a few feet from where Caleb sat on the ground. "Mr. Rourke," she said, with a particular warmth that had always worked before. "Mama sent this out for you. And we've made room at the table. It's much cooler now. Please come in. You don't need to sit out here in the heat." She glanced at Maddie with the smile still in place, and added lightly, like it barely mattered enough to say, "Maddie's simple about company. She doesn't mind being on her own. She really does prefer it out here." Caleb Rourke looked at Clara for a long moment. He did not stand. He did not take the cake. "Miss Carter," he said, "don't tell me what a woman wants after you made her eat outside." Clara's smile went very still on her face. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me?" he said pleasantly. "I appreciate the offer. I'll stay where I am." Clara stood there for 3 seconds that felt considerably longer. Then she turned, walked back across the yard, and went into the house, and Maddie heard the door close with more force than was necessary. Maddie looked at the man sitting in the dust beside her feed crate with his plate on his knee and his hat pushed back on his head. "You're going to have a very uncomfortable business meeting with Frank Carter tomorrow," she said. Something shifted in his face. It took her a moment to identify it because she hadn't seen it directed at her in a very long time. He was almost smiling. "Probably," he said. "Worth it." 1. They sat in the yard until the stars came out. Not talking constantly, he was not a man who talked to fill space, but talking when it meant something. He asked her about her grandmother, Margaret Bell, and she told him about a woman who had homesteaded that East 40 acres alone after her husband died in '69, who had built the Spring Creek irrigation herself, with help from no one, who had grown more food on 40 acres than most ranches grew on 200 because she understood water. Caleb listened the way she had seen very few people listen, not waiting for his turn to speak, not nodding at intervals to seem engaged. Actually listening like what she said was worth carrying somewhere. "She sounds like she knew what she was doing," he said. "She knew everything," Maddie said. "She's the one who taught me to cook, and to read a creek, and to tell which way a storm was coming by the color of the light at 4 in the afternoon. Someone taught her that way of cooking," he said, "and she passed it to you. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from nowhere." Maddie looked at the sky. The stars were thick and low the way they got in Wyoming in July, pushed close to the earth by the heat of the day. "Eleanor told me there was nothing at that homestead worth going back to," she said. "Eleanor told you a lot of things," he said. She turned to look at him. In the dark, his face was unreadable, but his voice was not. "What do you think is out there?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said carefully, "that when a woman spends 12 years cooking in a house and sleeping in corners and being told her family's land is worthless and her body is too much to fit at their table, somebody has worked very hard to make sure she doesn't look too close at what belongs to her." Maddie sat with that for a long moment. The wind moved across the yard, warm and dry, carrying with it the smell of dust and sage, and something else. The faint, acrid edge of smoke, not close, but somewhere out in the direction of the low hills to the east. She turned her head. Caleb had already turned his. "That smoke's coming from the east," he said, and his voice had changed, still even but sharper now, the way a man's voice gets when he's already moved past thinking into doing. Maddie was on her feet before he finished the sentence. Because the east was where the Bell homestead was. And she had known, since the moment she was 8 years old, and her grandmother first took her out there, that the East 40 was dry as bone in July, and the old farmhouse had a wood-shake roof that would catch a spark like it had been waiting for one its whole life. "That's my land," she said. He was already moving toward the horse. "Then we ride," he said. And this time when Maddie Bell Carter moved, she did not walk out a door alone into the dark with a plate she had earned and no one to see her go. She ran. They rode hard into the dark. Caleb's horse was a big mountain-bred roan built for rough country, and it ate the distance between the Carter Ranch and the Bell homestead without complaint. Maddie rode behind him, both hands gripping the back of his belt, the warm night air hitting her face like something alive, like something that wanted her to keep moving forward. She had not been on horseback in 3 years. Eleanor had sold the last Carter mare in the spring and called it a practical decision. Everything Eleanor did was a practical decision. That was how Eleanor managed to take without ever appearing to steal. The smoke was thicker now. She could smell it before she could see the orange glow rising above the low hill and the smell of it. Wood smoke, dry grass smoke, the particular sharpness of old timber, catching fast, put something cold in her chest despite the heat. "How bad?" she called over the wind. "Not at the house yet," he said. "Grass fire working toward it from the south fence. We've got time if we move." They crested the hill and she saw it. A line of low orange flame working through the dry summer grass, maybe 100 yards from the old farmhouse, moving slow but steady with the south wind pushing it along. The house itself was dark, standing exactly where it had always stood. The shape of it familiar, even after years of staying away because Eleanor said there was nothing worth going back to. Eleanor, who had said the structure was unsound. Eleanor, who had managed to keep Maddie from ever coming out here to look for herself. Caleb had the roan stopped and was off the horse before Maddie had fully registered they'd arrived. He pulled 2 feed sacks from his saddlebag, the kind a man who rode mountain country kept for exactly this kind of emergency, and handed one to Maddie without ceremony. "Beat it down from the left side," he said. "I'll work the right. Don't let it get around you." "I know how to fight a grass fire," she said. "I know you do," he said, and he was already running. She ran too. It was hard, hot, ugly work. The kind of work that made no allowances for anything, not for the heat already baking the air, not for the smoke that got down into her lungs and made her eyes stream, not for the fact that she hadn't slept properly in 2 days, and her arms ached from the morning's cooking. She beat the fire line with the feed sack, and when it jumped, she moved with it, and when the wind shifted, she read it and shifted before it could get behind her, because her grandmother had taught her to read a fire the same way she had taught her to read a creek and a storm sky. She could hear Caleb on the other side of the line, methodical, relentless, not making the dramatic sounds most men made when they were working hard. Just working. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Then the line broke, and they beat the broken ends down, and the fire was out, and the house was still standing. Maddie stood in the singed grass with the feed sack in her hand and her chest heaving and ash on her face, and looked at the farmhouse her grandmother had built. It was not unsound. The porch boards had weathered, and the south window was cracked, and the door hung slightly wrong on its hinges. But the walls were solid. The roof was whole. It was the house of a woman who had built things to last, and it had lasted, and Eleanor had known that, and lied about it for 12 years. "You all right?" Caleb was beside her, his vest darkened with ash, breathing harder than she'd heard him breathe all evening. "Yes," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I want to go inside." He looked at the house. The fire didn't reach it. "I know," she said. "That's not why I want to go in." The door stuck on its hinges, and he had to put a shoulder to it, and then they were inside, and the air was close and hot, and smelled of dust and old wood, and something underneath dried herbs maybe, or the ghost of them that hit Maddie somewhere low in her chest and made her throat close for just a moment. She knew this smell. She had known it when she was 8 years old, and her grandmother brought her out here for the first time and showed her how to pack herbs in dry cloth to keep the mice from the food store. She had known it every summer until she was 15, and Eleanor started finding reasons for her not to visit. The fireplace was cold. The table was there, still solid, two chairs pushed neatly against it the way her grandmother always left them. The kitchen shelf was bare but intact. Maddie moved through the room, slowly running her hand along the table edge, the shelf, the stones around the hearth. Then she stopped. The hearthstone. Third one from the left. Her grandmother had always called it her keeping stone, the one that sat slightly higher than the others, because the mortar beneath it had never been quite right. Maddie crouched down. She pressed her palm flat against it. It rocked. Her heart moved in a way she didn't have a name for. She looked up. Caleb was standing in the doorway, giving her space, watching without crowding. He raised his chin slightly, just enough to say, "Go on." She worked the stone loose. Beneath it was a shallow space, not a proper root cellar, just a deliberate hollow packed with dry cloth. She lifted the cloth away. Inside, a battered tin recipe box she recognized from her grandmother's kitchen, tied closed with leather cord. She lifted it out. Her hands were not steady. "There's something in here," she said. She hadn't meant to say it aloud. It just came out. "Open it," he said quietly. She untied the cord. The lid opened stiff on its hinge. Inside, folded careful and flat, were three things: a packet of letters tied together with faded ribbon, a hand-drawn county map with pencil marks on it she couldn't read in the low light, and beneath them both a folded document, heavier paper than the letters. The kind of paper that meant official business. She unfolded it. She had to hold it toward the window to catch the moonlight. She read the first line, then the second. Then she stopped reading and just sat there on her heels in the dust of her grandmother's house with the paper in both hands, and something enormous happening somewhere behind her breastbone. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah." "This is a deed." He was still. He was. "It's in my name," she said. "Martha Bell Carter. This is the farmhouse, the East 40 acres, the Spring Creek, signed and witnessed in 1873. She looked up at him. "I was 9 years old in 1873. "Your grandmother filed it," he said. "Not a question. She filed it," Maddie said. "She filed it, and she told no one, and she hid it here." Her voice did something she wasn't expecting. She pressed it flat. Because she knew. She already knew that if she died and left it to Eleanor to manage, Eleanor would manage it right into her own name. Caleb crossed the room and crouched beside her. He looked at the deed carefully without touching it, reading what she'd read. "That's a legal document," he said. "Properly signed. That's your land, Maddie." She looked around the room. At the table her grandmother had eaten at the hearthstone and the herbs and the window her grandmother had looked out of every morning for 20 years. "I cooked for them," she said. "In their house. 12 years. Her voice was quiet and perfectly steady and absolutely terrifying in its control. "And I owned this the whole time." Caleb did not say anything for a moment. Then, "What do you want to do?" It was the right question. Not "what should we do" or "let me handle it." "What do you want to do?" Maddie folded the deed carefully, tucked it inside her dress against her chest, and stood up. "First," she said, "I want to know what's in those letters." She read the letters by moonlight with Caleb quiet beside her, and the warm Wyoming night pressing in through the open door, and what she read rebuilt her entire understanding of the last 12 years piece by piece, like a wall going up. Margaret Bell had known she was dying. Not sudden, slowly over the last year of her life she had known. And she had spent that year writing letters to the county land office, to a lawyer in Cheyenne she had dealt with once for a water rights dispute, and most of them to Maddie herself. Letters Maddie had never received. "My girl." The first one started in her grandmother's cramped, certain handwriting. "I have left everything to you that I built, and I am leaving this here because I do not trust the hands it will pass through before it reaches yours." Maddie read that line twice. The deed is filed and legal, and no amount of managing or explaining or waiting it out will undo it. Eleanor will try. She has been trying to undo things her whole life that she didn't build and doesn't deserve. You are not to let her. The East 40 and the creek and the house are yours, and you are to run them the way I ran them, which is to say bravely and without asking anyone's permission. Maddie's throat ached. "You are the best cook I have ever known, and the strongest woman I expect I will ever know, and I am sorry I cannot be there to tell you so in person." Do not let them make you small. You were never small. You were only ever told that you were. She folded the letter. She did not cry, but it was close. Caleb was looking at the wall, giving her the privacy of not being watched. She knew, Maddie said. She planned ahead, he said. Eleanor intercepted the letters. It wasn't a question anymore. It was an arrangement of facts clicking into place. She must have. After Grandma Margaret died, all her correspondence would have come to the Carter house first. Eleanor would have managed it. The word managed sat in the air between them like something ugly. She kept me there, Maddie said. She kept me useful and told me my land wasn't worth visiting and let 12 years go by. And She stopped. I believed her. You had no reason not to, he said. I had every reason, she said. I just didn't look. Maddie, his voice was level. There's a difference between being deceived and being foolish. You were deceived. That's on Eleanor, not on you. She sat with that. Outside, a nightbird called somewhere near the spring creek, and the sound of running water came through the window, faint but real. The creek, her grandmother's creek, the one Margaret Bell had irrigated from, and fought a water rights dispute over, and ultimately won and left to her granddaughter in a legal document that had been sitting under a hearthstone for 11 years. The creek, she said suddenly. Caleb looked at her. That's why you're here, she said. The timber and water boundary. Your leasehold on the mountain section to the north, it abuts the Spring Creek. That's right, he said. You've been dealing with Eleanor Carter about a boundary dispute on land that doesn't belong to her. He was quiet for a moment. The land office has Eleanor listed as manager of record. Without the deed surfacing, there was nothing to challenge it. She had no right to manage it, Maddie said. She had no legal standing at all. No, he said. She didn't. Maddie thought about what that meant. 12 years of Eleanor managing property she had no claim to. 12 years of Maddie sleeping in the corner room, eating at the edge of the table, or outside in the yard being told she was too much and not enough and unwanted in the very house that sat on land she already owned. The anger that moved through her then was not the hot, ragged kind she'd learned to swallow down and keep out of sight. It was something colder and more permanent. The kind of anger that does not need to be performed because it has already decided what it intends to do. I'm going to the land office in town, she said. First light, he agreed. I'm going to need a witness, she said. Someone who can speak to the boundary dispute established that Eleanor had no standing to negotiate on this property. He looked at her. I'll be there. You don't owe me that, she said. No, he said. I don't. He held her gaze. I'll be there. And they rode back to the Carter Ranch in the early hours, the sky going gray at the edges, and Caleb unsaddled the roan and settled it in the yard, while Maddie went back to her corner room. She did not sleep. She lay on the narrow cot, with the deed pressed flat against her chest, and her grandmother's last letter unfolded beside her, and she looked at the ceiling and listened to the Carter house breathe. She heard Eleanor moving around at 5. Always first up, always in the kitchen, before anyone else managing. Maddie had always taken that as authority. She understood now it was fear. A woman like Eleanor Carter had to be first everywhere, because if she arrived second, someone might see what she'd taken before she could explain it away. At 6, Maddie dressed. She braided her hair without the headscarf. She washed her face. She put on her second dress, the blue one she saved for church, and tucked the deed and the letters into the pocket she had sewn into the inside seam 2 years ago, because she had learned long before that a woman needed at least one place where she could keep something that was hers. She walked into the kitchen. Eleanor was at the stove. She looked up when Maddie came in, and for just a moment, one small, unguarded moment, something moved behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or worry. You were out last night, Eleanor said. I heard you leave. There was a fire, Maddie said. Near the Bell homestead. I rode out to check on it. Eleanor's hands stilled on the stove handle. A fire. Grass fire. It didn't reach the house. The structure is quite sound, as it turns out. Maddie kept her voice even. I was surprised. You always said it was unsafe. I said... Eleanor turned around slowly. Her eyes moved over Maddie's dress, her unscarfed hair, the particular stillness of her posture. Eleanor Carter had not gotten where she was without learning to read a room. "I said no such thing." "You said it wasn't worth visiting," Maddie said. "Many times. Over 12 years. Because there's nothing out there, Maddie. It's an empty house on dry land with a—" "Caleb Rourke is going into town this morning," Maddie said. "He's asked me to ride with him. He has some business at the land office." The silence that followed was specific, pointed. The silence of a woman who has just understood that a door she thought she had locked is standing open. "Maddie?" Eleanor said carefully. "I'll be back by midday," Maddie said. She turned to leave. "Maddie!" Eleanor's voice had changed. The practiced smoothness was still there, but underneath it was something tighter, something that was working to stay calm. "Whatever that man told you last night, he doesn't know the first thing about our family's business. He's a stranger who wrote in asking about boundary lines. He's not a Carter," Maddie said. "That's true." She walked out. Frank Carter found Caleb at the fence post, where he'd tied the roan, and tried to have the business conversation about the timber boundary there. And then before Maddie came out of the house, and Caleb listened politely, and said almost nothing useful, because there was no point in discussing a boundary with a man whose wife had been managing land she had no legal right to manage. When Maddie came out of the house in her blue dress with her hair braided and her chin level, Frank looked between them with the expression of a man who had just noticed the ground was moving under his feet, but hadn't figured out yet which direction. "I'll ride into town with Miss Carter," Caleb said. "We can discuss the boundary after she's completed her business at the land office." "The land office," Frank said. "Land office," Caleb said pleasantly, and helped Maddie onto the roan, and they rode out. Behind them, the Carter house door opened and closed twice. Maddie did not look back. She kept her face forward toward town, toward the rising sun already bleaching the sky white with July heat, toward whatever was waiting for her at the end of this road that she had not been allowed to walk in 12 years. "You're quiet," Caleb said after a while. "I'm thinking," she said. "About Eleanor. About my grandmother," she said. "About what it cost her to hide that deed and write those letters and know she might die before I found them." She paused. "She trusted that I'd look. Eventually." "She was right," he said. "It took a grass fire and a stranger who sat down in the dirt," Maddie said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Sometimes it takes both." The town appeared ahead, the main street still quiet in the early morning, the general store just opening 2 horses at the rail outside the feed merchants. Small town. Everybody's business was everybody's business, and a plus-size woman riding double with a mountain man into town at 7 in the morning in her church dress was going to be noticed. She did not care. She had stopped caring what this town noticed the night before, sometime between the grass fire and the hearthstone, and the letter that said, "You were never small, you were only ever told that you were." The land office opened at 7:30. They were at the door at 7:28. The county clerk was a thin, balding man named Gerald Phelps, who had been managing land records in this county for 11 years and prided himself on knowing every parcel by memory. He looked at Maddie when she came through the door, and then at Caleb behind her, and arranged his face into the careful neutrality of a man who had learned that the combination of large, quiet men and determined women usually meant paperwork. "Ma'am," he said. "Sir, how can I help you this morning?" Maddie reached into the inside pocket of her blue dress and drew out the folded deed. She set it on the clerk's desk with both hands, smoothed it flat, and looked at Gerald Phelps with the calm, clear eyes of a woman who had been waiting 12 years for this moment and was not going to waste it. "My name is Martha Bell Carter," she said, "and I believe you have some records that belong to me." Gerald Phelps looked at the deed. He picked it up carefully, holding it at the edges the way a man handles a document he already suspects is going to change his morning. He read the first paragraph, then the signatures, then the witnessing. Then he set it down and looked at Maddie over the rims of his spectacles. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "Under the hearthstone of the Bell farmhouse," she said, "where my grandmother hid it before she died." He looked at Caleb. "I'm the leaseholder on the mountain section north of the Bell property," Caleb said. "I've been dealing with a boundary dispute through Eleanor Carter as manager of record. I can testify that I had no knowledge this deed existed and that the property in question has been occupied and managed without the legal owner's knowledge or consent." Gerald Phelps took his spectacles off and cleaned them on his shirt. He put them back on. He looked at the deed again. "Eleanor Carter has been listed as manager of record since 1875, he said carefully. "She filed a management notice after Margaret Bell's death." "On what grounds?" Maddie asked. "She claimed—" He opened a lower drawer, pulled a folder, ran his finger down the page. "She claimed the estate had no surviving heirs capable of independent management." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. "No surviving heirs," Maddie said slowly. "Capable of independent management. That's what's on file," he said. He did not sound comfortable saying it. Maddie was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "I was 15 years old when Eleanor filed that. I was living in her house. She knew exactly where I was." Gerald Phelps said nothing, but his expression said everything. Caleb had gone very still behind her. Not the stillness of a man holding himself back, but the stillness of a man who has decided that this moment belongs to the woman in front of him, and he will not take 1 inch of it away from her. Maddie put both hands flat on the desk. "I cooked for them in the house I owned," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "I slept in corners while they used my land. I was told I was too much to sit at a table and not enough to stand on my own ground." She looked at Gerald Phelps steadily. "I am standing here now with a legal deed in my grandmother's handwriting, and I am telling you that ends today." The land office was very quiet. Outside, the town was waking up. A wagon rolled past on the main street. Someone called a greeting to someone else. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning in a small Wyoming town that had no idea what was happening inside the land office on the corner of Front and 2nd. Gerald Phelps picked up his pen. "I'll need to make a certified copy of this deed," he said quietly. "And I'll need to file a correction to the management record." He paused. "It will take some doing to unwind 12 years of paperwork, Miss Carter. But the deed is legal. It's properly signed and witnessed. The land is yours." Maddie did not smile. She did not cry. She stood at that desk with her hands pressed flat against the wood, and breathed the particular breath of someone who has just picked up a weight they have been carrying for a very long time, and set it down in exactly the right place. Behind her, Caleb Rourke put his hat back on his head. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. The clerk was already writing. Gerald Phelps was still writing when the door opened behind them. Maddie did not turn around. She knew the sound of Eleanor Carter's boots on a wood floor. She had been hearing them for 12 years, that particular sharp, deliberate rhythm, the walk of a woman who moved through spaces like she had personally granted them permission to exist. How Eleanor had known to come. How she had gotten to town this fast. Those questions answered themselves. Frank Carter had saddled up the moment Caleb and Maddie rode out, and Frank, whatever his other failings, could move quickly when Eleanor needed him to. "Gerald!" Eleanor's voice was warm, social, the voice she saved for rooms where she needed people to agree with her. "Good morning. I hope my niece hasn't taken up too much of your time." Gerald Phelps looked up from his writing. Then he looked at Maddie, then at Eleanor. The expression on his face was the expression of a man who had suddenly understood that his morning was considerably more complicated than he had anticipated, and who was choosing carefully where to place himself within that complication. He chose correctly. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "your niece has presented a deed to the Bell homestead property, dated 1873, legally signed and witnessed." He paused deliberately. "I'm processing the correction to the management record now." The silence that followed had a texture to it. Eleanor came to the desk. She looked at the deed. She looked at it for a long time without saying anything, and watching her look at it was like watching a person look at a fire they had thought was out, that particular controlled stillness of someone calculating how much damage has already been done. "That document," Eleanor said at last, "is very old, and Maddie has been, she's not always—" She drew a breath and reset. "Gerald, you know our family. You know I have managed that property responsibly for over a decade. Maddie is a sweet girl, but she has never been equipped to handle independent—" "Eleanor." Maddie's voice was quiet, flat. It stopped Eleanor mid-sentence the way a door closing stops sound. Eleanor turned to look at her. Don't, Maddie said. Don't say it again. Maddie, I am trying to protect. You filed a notice with this office, Maddie said, stating that Margaret Bell's estate had no surviving heirs capable of independent management. I was 15 years old. I was living in your house. You knew exactly where I was and exactly what you were doing. Eleanor's mouth opened. Don't, Maddie said again. Still quiet, still flat. The calmest she had ever sounded in her life, which was the most frightening thing about it. Gerald Phelps kept writing. Caleb stood by the door and said nothing, which was exactly right. Eleanor looked around the room at Gerald's bent head, at Caleb's still face, at Maddie standing at the desk with both hands flat and her chin level and absolutely nothing in her expression that could be bargained with. Eleanor Carter had spent her whole life reading rooms and finding the angle that worked, and right now, every angle in this room was wrong for her, and she knew it. She straightened her spine. You'll regret this, she said. Not loud, almost gentle the way a person says a thing they mean completely. You don't know what it took to keep that property from going to the bank after your grandmother died. The debts on it, the back taxes. I paid those, Maddie, out of Carter money. You're welcome to your 40 acres and your dried-up creek house, but don't think for 1 minute you'd have anything to walk back into if I hadn't held it together. It was a good argument. Maddie recognized that. It had the shape of a true thing, even if it wasn't one, or even if it was partly one, which was worse because partial truths were harder to set down cleanly than outright lies. She looked at Gerald Phelps. Were there back taxes? She asked. Gerald opened another drawer, ran his finger down another column. The property had 2 years of outstanding tax in 1875, he said. They were paid. I have the record here. He looked up. Paid by Margaret Bell's estate directly. There's a notation. He turned the ledger so Maddie could see. The estate had funds. They were applied before Mrs. Carter filed the management notice. Eleanor went very still. The estate paid its own taxes, Maddie said. That's what the record shows, Gerald said. Maddie turned to look at Eleanor. Eleanor Carter in that moment looked like what she was, a woman who had built a 12-year story on a foundation she had believed no one would ever go looking under. A woman who had miscalculated once badly which particular granddaughter her own mother-in-law had trusted enough to deed property to and had spent every year since making sure that granddaughter never had reason to look. I want an accounting, Maddie said. To Gerald. Of any rents, timber rights, water rights, or other proceeds that have come off the Bell property in the past 12 years. I want to know what Eleanor collected in my name. Eleanor made a sound. It was not quite a word. It was the sound a structure makes before it gives way. That will take some time, Gerald said carefully. I have time, Maddie said. I have 40 acres of it. They left Eleanor standing in the land office with Gerald Phelps and a ledger that was already telling a story she couldn't rewrite. Outside, the town had fully woken up. Main Street was moving merchants, opening women carrying baskets. 2 cowboys from the Hendricks Ranch riding through slow. Normal Wednesday morning in a small Wyoming town, except that Maddie Bell Carter had just walked out of the land office owning property she'd been kept from for 12 years, and small towns notice things. The woman from the millinery, Ruth Alderton, who had sold Eleanor a hat every spring and smiled at Maddie like she was a piece of furniture, was standing on the boardwalk with a wrapped package in her arms. She looked at Maddie, looked at Caleb, looked back at Maddie. Morning, Maddie, she said cautiously. Morning, Mrs. Alderton, Maddie said, and walked past her without stopping. Caleb walked beside her, not behind her, not ahead, beside. What do you need first? He asked. Maddie thought about it practically, which was the only way she knew how to think. I need to go back to the Carter house and collect my things. I won't sleep another night under Eleanor's roof. Where will you sleep? My house, she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like she'd been saying it her whole life. The Bell homestead. My grandmother left me a house. I intend to use it. He was quiet for a moment. The place needs work. Porch boards, the well needs checking the south window. I know, she said. I can help, he said. Just that. no ceremony around it. She looked at him sideways. Why? He stopped walking. She stopped too, because when a man that size stopped, you noticed. Because the boundary dispute on my lease is with your land now, he said, and I'd rather settle it with the rightful owner, because I've got timber and tools and more time on my hands than a man needs between mountain seasons. He held her gaze. And because you sat on a feed crate and ate the meal you cooked and didn't let any of them see you flinch, and that's the kind of person I want to know. Maddie looked at him for a long moment. You're a strange man, Caleb Rourke, she said. Yes, ma'am, he agreed. I've been told. They went to get her things. The Carter house was quiet when they arrived, which meant Eleanor was still in town, and Frank was making himself scarce. Clara was in the front room, and she was the one who met them at the door, and she looked at Maddie's face and then at Caleb behind her and made a rapid, accurate assessment of the situation. You're leaving, Clara said. I am, Maddie said. Clara stood in the doorway for 3 seconds. Then she stepped aside. Maddie went to her corner room. It took 12 minutes to pack everything she owned, which told her something she had known, but never said aloud. That after 12 years in a house, a woman who has been kept small accumulates very little. A dress, a Bible, a hairbrush. The letters she'd carried back from her grandmother's house. A small bundle of dried herbs she'd saved from last summer's garden, because she couldn't help it, because that was who she was. She picked up the bundle of herbs last. When she came back through the front room, Clara was still there standing by the window, and the expression on her face was something Maddie hadn't expected and didn't quite know what to do with. Not hostility, not triumph. Something quieter than both. She always made you cook, Clara said. I used to watch you. In the kitchen at 5 in the morning, in the heat. She paused. I never said anything. Maddie looked at her. No, she said. You didn't. Clara swallowed. I didn't know about the deed. I want you to know that. What Mama did, I didn't know. Maddie considered that. She considered whether it was true and decided it probably was. Clara was selfish and spoiled and accustomed to comfort, but she was not her mother. There was a difference. Knowing and not looking are different things, Maddie said. But they end up in the same place. She walked out. The next 3 days moved fast. Caleb rode back to the mountain section to collect tools and timber he'd felled earlier in the season for his own cabin repairs. He returned the following morning with a loaded pack mule and a level and 4 different kinds of nails, and he set to work on the Bell homestead's porch without making any particular conversation about it. Maddie set to work on the inside. The house needed cleaning first, a full day of it, the thorough kind, the kind her grandmother would have recognized as respectful. She beat the dust out of everything. Checked the roof from the inside for any light that shouldn't be there. Washed the windows with vinegar and creek water, and found under the kitchen shelf a cast iron skillet that had been her grandmother's, and that Eleanor had apparently never bothered to take because she hadn't thought it worth anything. Maddie held that skillet for a long moment. Then she hung it on the hook above the hearth where it had always lived. By the second evening, the porch boards were solid under her feet. By the third morning, Caleb had the south window resealed and the well cleared out and tested. Water's good, he said, coming back from the well with wet hands. Deep enough to hold through August. Your grandmother knew where to dig. She knew everything, Maddie said. She was standing in the kitchen doorway with 2 cups of coffee she'd made on the hearth fire, and she held one out to him. She knew exactly what she was doing with that deed. Exactly. She hid it where she knew I'd look. The keeping stone she showed it to me when I was 8. Said every house needed one place to keep the things that mattered. Caleb took the coffee. She hid it knowing you might not find it for years. She hid it knowing Eleanor would clean out everything visible, Maddie said. But Eleanor didn't know about the keeping stone. Grandma Margaret never showed Eleanor anything she didn't have to. He drank his coffee. Smart woman. The smartest I ever knew, Maddie said. She looked at the kitchen around her, at the iron skillet on the hook at the shelves she'd wiped clean. I want to open this place, she said. He looked at her. Not just live here, she said. Open it. A proper eating house. For ranch hands, for widows passing through, for travelers, for anyone who needs a meal and a table. She watched his face. People in this county work hard and eat badly. You know what cowboys eat on a long drive: salt pork and hardtack for 3 weeks. A woman in town charges 4 times what a meal costs her to make it. You'd undercut her, he said. I'd feed people properly, she said. For a fair price. Out of my own kitchen on my own land. She paused. My grandmother fed half this county at one point. Did you know that before she got sick? Ranch hands used to ride an extra hour out of their way to stop at the Bell place because she fed them like people. I didn't know that, he said, but I believe it. I want to do the same thing, Maddie said. I want there to be a sign above the door. I already know what I want it to say. He waited. Every chair is for someone, she said. He looked at her for a long time. Then he set his coffee cup down on the porch rail and looked at the empty door frame above the front door. I can build you a sign, he said. I know you can, she said, but I'm going to paint it myself. Word travels fast in small Wyoming towns, and the word that traveled fastest in the week following Maddie Bell Carter's visit to the land office was this: Eleanor Carter had been managing property. She had no legal right to manage, and Gerald Phelps had the documentation to prove it. And the accounting he was completing for Maddie showed 12 years of timber and water rights proceeds that had never been paid to the actual owner. Eleanor did not come to the Bell homestead. She sent Frank once on a Tuesday afternoon to try a conversation about family reconciliation and the misunderstandings that arise from complicated estate situations, and Maddie listened to Frank's rehearsed speech from the porch steps with her arms folded and said when he finished, "Tell Eleanor that the accounting Gerald Phelps is completing will show what she owes me. If she wants to settle it privately before it becomes a county matter, she can come herself and speak plainly." Frank went away. Eleanor did not come. What came instead was the town. Not all at once. Not in any organized fashion. It started with Will Garrett, a 60-year-old ranch hand from the Hendricks place, who had eaten at Margaret Bell's table 20 years ago and heard from a boy in town that the Bell homestead was being opened up again. He rode out on a Saturday morning and knocked on the porch post, the new one solid pine planed smooth, and asked if it was true. Not yet, Maddie said. 2 more weeks. I'll be back in 2 weeks, Will said. He spread the word. The following Tuesday, 3 women from town arrived together. Not the church ladies, not the ones who had smiled at Eleanor's jokes about Maddie at the summer social. These were working women, a laundress, a seamstress, and the wife of the man who ran the grain mill, women who worked hard and cooked when they had time and sometimes didn't have time. They came to see what was happening at the old Bell place, and they found Maddie scrubbing the long table she had hauled out of the back room, and Caleb building a bench along the east wall, and the smell of test batch bread coming through the open window. "Can we help?" the laundress asked. Maddie looked up. "You know how to sew canvas." "Born to it," the woman said. "I need curtains for the east windows," Maddie said. "I've got the cloth." They came in. By Friday, 5 people who were not related to Maddie by blood had put work into the Bell homestead, and none of them had been asked twice. Clara Carter came on a Thursday afternoon, alone, without announcing herself, and stood at the edge of the yard, watching Maddie and the millwife's daughter string a new rope line between the fence posts for drying dishcloths. Maddie saw her and kept working. Clara walked up to the fence. "I want to say something," Clara said. "Then say it," Maddie said. Clara looked at the house. At the sign frame Caleb had built above the door, not yet painted, just the bare wood waiting. At the new bench visible through the open window. At the iron skillet hanging visible through the kitchen doorway. "You were never what Mama said you were," Clara said. "I knew it. I knew it, and I didn't say so because it was easier not to." She paused. "That makes me a coward." Maddie looked at her. Clara was 22 and pretty, and had never worked a full day in her life, and she was standing in the July heat with her hands clasped in front of her and something genuine on her face. Not performed regret, not calculated reconciliation, just a young woman who had followed her mother's lead for 22 years and was beginning to understand where that led. "It does," Maddie agreed. "But you're here now." Clara swallowed. "Is there something I can do?" Maddie handed her the other end of the rope line. "Hold this tight while I tie off the post." Clara held it. The night before the eating house was set to open, Maddie sat at her grandmother's table with the deed laid flat in front of her and the letters stacked beside it, and she did something she had been putting off for 2 weeks because she was not sure she could do it without falling apart. She read every letter her grandmother had written her, all 7 of them. Written over the course of the last year of Margaret Bell's life, addressed to Maddie, intercepted and hidden by Eleanor, preserved in the tin recipe box under the keeping stone for 11 years. Her grandmother had known her. That was the thing that hit hardest, not the property, not the justice of the deed, not even the anger at Eleanor. Her grandmother had known her. The letters were full of her specific, careful, detailed knowledge of who Maddie was and what she was capable of, written by a woman who had watched her granddaughter grow and understood what she saw. "You will doubt yourself," one letter said. "You have always doubted yourself because the people around you have benefited from your doubt. Do not give them that anymore. It is the only thing of yours they were ever entitled to take, and they took it without your consent." Maddie pressed her hand flat on that page. Outside, she could hear Caleb moving around. He had been sleeping in the barn he'd helped repair his idea, not asked, just done, because a woman opening a business alone in a property that had been disputed needed someone nearby until the situation settled. He hadn't made anything of it, he just did it. She heard the barn door, his boots on the packed earth, and then quiet. He had looked in on her earlier, seen she was reading, and gone back outside without a word. He understood somehow, when a moment belonged to someone else entirely. "You cook the way I taught you," the last letter said, which is to say, you cook, like it matters because you understand that feeding people is not a small thing. It is the most direct way one person can tell another you are worth taking care of. Do not let anyone take that from you either. Maddie folded the letter. She sat in the dark for a moment. Then she got up, found the paint she'd mixed, deep red, the color her grandmother had always said she'd paint the front of the house if she ever got around to it, and she went and stood before the sign frame above the door. She painted it herself, every letter, slow and careful, the way she did everything that mattered. Every chair is for someone. The paint was still wet when Caleb came around the corner of the house and stopped looking up at it. He didn't say anything for a while. She'd have liked that, Maddie said. She wasn't asking. "Yes," he said. She would have. The night was warm around them, the kind of Wyoming July night that didn't cool down much past midnight, the stars still thick, and the creek making its small sound in the dark. "I'm scared," Maddie said. She had not said it to anyone, and she was not sure why she was saying it to him, except that he was the only person she'd met in recent memory who made truth feel like a reasonable thing to offer. "Of what specifically?" he asked. "That they won't come," she said. "That I'll open the door tomorrow and no one will be there. That Eleanor will say something around town and people will believe her because they always have." Caleb looked at the sign. "Will Garrett told 3 men at the Hendricks Ranch," he said. "Those men told 4 others. The seamstress in town has told everyone she's sewn for in the past 2 weeks. Ruth Alderton, the woman from the millinery, she came by this morning while you were at the creek." He paused. "She asked if she could reserve a spot for lunch on Friday." Maddie looked at him. "Ruth Alderton." "Yes, ma'am." Ruth Alderton, who has smiled at every one of Eleanor's jokes since 1876. "She looked a little uncomfortable about it," he said. "But she asked." Maddie let out a breath. Then something happened to her face that hadn't happened freely in a long time. Not a performed smile, not a polite one. A real one, unexpected, rising from somewhere underneath. "She'll want the beef stew," Maddie said. "Everyone always wants the beef stew." "Then make enough for Ruth Alderton," he said. "I make enough for everyone," she said. He smiled then too. She saw it in the dark, brief and real, the first time she'd seen it without any particular occasion attached to it. Just a man smiling because the moment called for it. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's a big day." "I know it," she said. She looked up at the sign one more time. The letters still wet, the deep red, holding its color even in the dark. Every chair is for someone. She went inside. She slept better than she had in 12 years. The morning the Bell Eating House opened, Maddie was up before 4, not because she was nervous, though she was. Not because she hadn't slept, though she'd woken twice. She was up because that was when the bread needed to start, and the bread needed to start because she had promised Will Garrett beef stew and hand-rolled biscuits, and she did not make promises she didn't keep. That was the one thing Eleanor Carter had never managed to take from her. Not the habit of follow-through, not the understanding that a promise made in a kitchen was as binding as anything signed in a land office. She built the hearth fire in the dark, fed it careful the way her grandmother had taught her small wood first, then larger, never rush a fire, or it burns hot and uneven, and you pay for it an hour later when the bread scorches on one side. She mixed the dough by feel more than measure, the way she always had, the way that had taken years to trust, and that Eleanor had once called imprecise, and that produced consistently the best biscuits in the county. She was rolling the first batch when she heard Caleb's boots on the porch. He knocked on the door frame. He always knocked. She had noticed that always announced himself, never assumed, and when she called him in, he came through carrying a crate of eggs and a paper-wrapped package she didn't recognize. "From the Hendricks Ranch," he said, setting the eggs down. "Tom Hendricks sent them over last night. Said his wife cured this herself." He unwrapped the package. A full side of smoked bacon, dense and dark, and smelling like hickory and thyme. Maddie stared at it. "Tom Hendricks," she said. "His wife Sarah?" Caleb said. "She told Tom to write it over personally. Said she's been waiting for somewhere decent to eat in this county since the hotel in town started charging $3 for a meal that tastes like boot leather." Maddie lifted the bacon and smelled it. Perfect cure. 2 weeks at least, maybe 3. Sarah Hendricks knew what she was doing. "I'll need to thank her," Maddie said. "She's coming for lunch," he said. Maddie set the bacon down. She pressed her lips together for a moment. Then she picked up the rolling pin and went back to work because the bread wasn't going to roll itself, and because she did not trust herself to speak for a moment without her voice doing something she didn't want it to do. By 6 in the morning, the bread was in the stew was started, and the bacon was sliced and ready. By 7, the table was set 12 places, the most. She had chairs and bench space for every piece of wood scrubbed clean the night before. By 7:30, the sign above the door was fully dry, the red paint bright in the early morning sun, and Maddie stood on the porch and looked down the cart road and saw coming from the direction of town a wagon she recognized as belonging to the millwife, and behind it, 2 horses she didn't recognize at all. "They're coming," she said. Caleb was leaning on the fence post with his coffee. He looked down the road. "They are," he said. "I'm not ready," she said. He looked at her. "The bread's in, the stew is on, the table is set, the sign is painted." "That's not what I mean," she said. He understood. "Yes, you are," he said, simply without decoration. She straightened her apron, went inside, put herself behind the table where she belonged. The door opened at 8 o'clock, and Maddie Bell Carter's eating house opened with it. Will Garrett came first, hat in hand, with 2 other Hendricks men behind him who had the look of cowboys who had been eating camp food for 3 weeks and had ridden considerably out of their way on the strength of Will's description of what was happening at the Bell place. They sat at the bench along the east wall, the one Caleb had built solid and wide, and when Maddie brought out the bread and the stew, Will Garrett took one bite and put his fork down and said to nobody in particular, "Lord Almighty, that's the real thing." The 2 cowboys nodded like men in church. The millwife arrived next with her daughter and her sister, and behind them, 3 women, Maddie didn't know by name, who turned out to be from a neighboring ranch property and had heard from the seamstress that the Bell place was open. They filled the remaining seats, and the room was full, all 12 places taken, and Maddie moved from kitchen to table and back again, with the particular efficient grace of a woman who has been cooking for large groups since she was 13 and knows exactly how to read a room's rhythm. Nobody ate outside. That was the thing that hit her, somewhere around the 3rd time she refilled the breadbasket. Nobody ate outside. 12 people at her table, strangers and acquaintances, and 1 woman who had driven out from 2 ranches over on nothing but word of mouth, and all of them inside, all of them at chairs that were exactly the right size for every person sitting in them, and nobody was being told to take their plate to the yard. Ruth Alderton arrived at 11:30 for what she called lunch with a friend from the church sewing circle, and she sat down across from Sarah Hendricks, who she knew. And the conversation that followed was the kind that happens when people who normally perform politeness at each other find themselves in a room where nobody is performing anything. When Ruth left, she pressed 2 extra coins into Maddie's hand at the door. "For the bread alone," she said. "That was worth twice what you charged." Maddie looked at the coins. "I charge a fair price," she said. "Then charge more," Ruth said not unkindly. "A fair price to you ought to account for the fact that you're the best cook in this county." Ruth walked out. Maddie stood in the doorway and watched her go, and something settled in her chest that she hadn't known was still waiting to settle. The trouble arrived at 2:30, when Eleanor Carter came down the cart road in Frank's wagon, with Clara sitting rigid beside her, and Frank driving with the expression of a man who had not wanted to come, but had learned 30 years ago that wanting didn't factor much into Eleanor's decisions. Maddie saw the wagon from the kitchen window. She set down the bowl she was washing, dried her hands on her apron, and walked to the front door. She opened it before Eleanor could knock because she was done with Eleanor Carter having any version of the upper hand, however small. Eleanor stepped down from the wagon. She looked at the sign. Her face went through something when she looked at it, a small involuntary tightening. A woman who has spent years controlling the story, encountering the story, continuing without her. She walked up to the porch. "Maddie," she said. "Eleanor," Maddie said. Clara stayed in the wagon. Frank stayed on the seat. This was Eleanor's errand, not theirs. "I have spoken with Gerald Phelps," Eleanor said. Her voice was measured, every word placed carefully. "About the accounting. I want to discuss it with you before it becomes a formal matter." "I've spoken with Gerald too," Maddie said. "I know what the accounting shows." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "There are expenses you're not considering. 12 years of $340, Maddie said. "That's what Gerald's accounting shows. Timber rights and water access fees collected on this property over 12 years, minus documented maintenance costs." She held Eleanor's gaze. "You kept $340 that belonged to me." Eleanor opened her mouth. "I want it paid to Gerald Phelps's office," Maddie said. "To be held in account for the eating house until I have need of it. I don't want it brought here. I don't want to see it in your hands." "Maddie, that is an unreasonable—" "It's what I want," Maddie said. "Or the matter goes to the county judge and Gerald's accounting goes with it, and everyone in the county knows not just that you managed property without standing, but what you collected from it." She paused. "Either way is fine with me, Eleanor. I have nothing left to lose by letting people know the truth. You have considerably more." The silence between them was long and specific. Eleanor looked at the sign again, then at the window where the faint sounds of the eating house dishes. Voices, the particular domestic noise of a room being used, were audible even from the porch. Then back at Maddie. "You've become hard," Eleanor said. "No," Maddie said. "I became clear. There's a difference." Eleanor held herself very still. Then, "And that man, Rourke. What about him?" "People are talking," Eleanor said. "A woman alone with a man on her property unmarried." "Eleanor." Maddie's voice did not rise. "The last time you told a room what a woman was doing and why you were wrong about all of it. I'd be careful about trying it again." Frank Carter on the wagon seat stared at a point somewhere in the middle distance and appeared to be trying to remove himself from the situation by sheer force of not existing. Eleanor looked at Maddie for a long moment. The calculation in her eyes was visible, running fast. What angle was left? What pressure point? What handle she still had access to? And Maddie watched her look, and watched her find nothing, and watched that land on Eleanor's face, like the particular expression of a woman who has run out of moves and knows it. Eleanor turned and walked back to the wagon. She climbed up beside Frank without assistance and did not look back. Clara, as the wagon turned, looked back. She held Maddie's gaze for just a moment. Then she nodded once small private. Not forgiveness asked or given, just acknowledgement. "I see you." Maddie nodded back. The wagon went down the road and turned out of sight. Caleb came around the side of the house where he had been working on the well cover, and he did not ask what had happened because the expression on Maddie's face told him most of it. He just came and stood nearby the way he did and said, "She coming back?" "To pay Gerald?" Maddie said. "Or to let it go to the judge?" She stepped back inside. "Either way, it's handled." He looked at her. "You all right?" She thought about it honestly, which was something she was getting better at the habit of actual accounting, instead of the automatic fine she had trained herself to produce for 12 years. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." The eating house found its rhythm in the weeks that followed, the way a well-run kitchen always does, not all at once but in small accumulations each day, teaching her something the day before hadn't. She learned that ranch hands wanted quantity and reliability above everything else, the same good food every time, enough of it served without ceremony. She learned that the women who came, the millwife, the laundress, the seamstress, and her apprentice, Ruth Alderton, and her sewing circle on Fridays, wanted something different. They wanted a table where nobody was performing for anyone, where the food was honest and the conversation could be whatever it needed to be. She gave them both. She raised her prices twice, not by much. But Ruth had been right. A fair price had to account for real skill, and Maddie had spent 27 years developing real skill, and she was done undervaluing it. Caleb settled the boundary dispute on a Tuesday afternoon at Gerald Phelps's office, with Maddie present as the property owner in the time it took to drink 2 cups of coffee and sign 2 documents. The Spring Creek boundary was straightforward once it was negotiated with the actual landowner instead of Eleanor Carter, and Caleb's water rights on the mountain lease were formalized cleanly and to both parties' satisfaction. Gerald Phelps shook both their hands and looked like a man who was glad to have the whole thing properly organized. Walking out of the land office that second time felt different than the first. The first time she had walked out shaking inside the deed pressed to her chest, like something she was afraid would disappear. This time, she walked out with a boundary agreement in her pocket and 3 people on the street who called her name and meant it well. "Miss Carter." The voice came from the side of the dry goods store, and she turned to find a woman she didn't know well. Maybe 40, weathered and lean, with a child beside her who couldn't have been more than 8, both of them in clothes that had been washed so many times they'd gone transparent at the elbows. The woman had the look of someone working up to something they hadn't decided yet. "Yes," Maddie said. "I heard you're running the Bell place now," the woman said. "Eating house." "That's right," Maddie said. I don't have a lot of—" The woman stopped, started again. "My husband passed in April. I've got 3 children and I'm taking in laundry from the hotel, but it's not, some days the cooking doesn't—" She stopped herself again. Her jaw was tight. She was not a woman who asked for things easily. "I heard you had a fair price." Maddie looked at the woman, at the child beside her who was holding the woman's hand, and looking at Maddie with the careful measuring eyes of a child who had learned to read adult conversations for information about whether things were going to be all right. "What's your name?" Maddie asked. "June Pratt," the woman said. "Widow of Samuel Pratt." "Mrs. Pratt," Maddie said. "My prices are fair and my portions are generous. If a day comes when the portions matter more than the price, you come anyway. We'll settle it when you're able." June Pratt looked at her. Something happened behind her eyes, the particular release of a tension that had been held too long and had begun to feel permanent. "I wouldn't want charity," June said. "It's not charity," Maddie said. "It's how my grandmother ran things, and I intend to keep it that way." She paused. "There will be days when you help someone, and days when you need help, Mrs. Pratt, and only a fool keeps a separate accounting of which is which." June Pratt pressed her lips together. Then she nodded. "Thank you." "Come Saturday," Maddie said. "Bring all 3 children. I'll make extra biscuits." She walked on. Caleb fell into step beside her, having waited without comment through the whole exchange. "Extra biscuits," he said. "The children need to eat," Maddie said. He was quiet for a moment. "You know you can't feed everyone in the county for free." "I'm not feeding them for free," Maddie said. "I'm feeding them on faith, which is a different thing." He didn't argue. She noticed he never argued with her on matters of principle. He might raise a practical concern quietly once, and then let her decide, and then help her do whatever she'd decided. It was the most respectful form of partnership she had ever experienced, and she was still getting used to it. The twist that came in the 4th week was not what anyone expected. It was Clara who brought it. She arrived on a Wednesday morning alone on a horse Maddie didn't recognize. A small brown mare, not a Carter horse, and she came to the door with something in her hands that she held out before she'd even finished her greeting. A ledger. Old cloth bound, the kind kept in a household for domestic accounts. This is Mama's, Clara said. Her personal household ledger, not the one she showed Gerald. She paused. I found it last night in the lining of her winter trunk. I don't think she knows I have it. Maddie looked at the ledger. She looked at Clara. Why are you bringing this to me? She asked. Clara held her gaze. Because the other ledger, the one Mama showed Gerald, it shows maintenance costs that covered most of what she owed you. Gerald's accounting left you $340. She swallowed. This ledger shows something different. The maintenance costs she listed for the Bell property. She didn't spend them on the Bell property. Maddie took the ledger. She opened it on the kitchen table. Caleb sat across from her, and she turned the pages, slowly running her finger down the columns, and with each page the number in her head got larger. The maintenance costs. Eleanor had claimed new roofing, well repair, structural work, fence replacement were all listed in her personal ledger too. But in Eleanor's own handwriting in the column beside each expense was a different notation. Carter, east fence. Carter well. Carter barn roof. Carter property, everyone. Eleanor had charged Maddie's land for repairs she'd made to her own. The real amount owed was not $340. It was considerably more. Maddie closed the ledger. She sat with it for a moment. Then she looked at Clara. You know what this does, Maddie said. If I take this to Gerald. Yes, Clara said. It implicates your mother in deliberate fraud, not just mismanagement. Fraud. Yes, Clara said again. She had the look of someone who had been up all night with a decision and had come out the other side of it changed. Why? Maddie asked. Clara sat down across the table. She folded her hands. She looked at them for a moment, and when she looked up, her voice was steady, but it cost her something. Because I watched you eat outside, she said. Every time, for 12 years. I watched her do it, and I said nothing, and I told myself it was family business and complicated and not my place. She paused. It was my place. I was just afraid of her. She met Maddie's eyes. I'm still afraid of her. But I'm more afraid of what I'm becoming if I keep pretending I don't see what she does. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the creek made its small sound. Maddie looked at the ledger, at what it contained, at what it would cost Eleanor, and what it would mean for Clara, who would have to live in that house and face that woman across a table every morning, regardless of what Maddie decided. I'm going to take this to Gerald, Maddie said, but I'm going to tell him the full accounting needs to be completed before anything goes to the judge. Eleanor has one chance to settle it properly and completely before it becomes a public legal matter. Clara nodded. That gives your mother a choice, Maddie said. It's more than she gave me, but I'm giving it anyway because I'm not her, and I don't intend to become her. Clara stood up. She looked like she wanted to say something else, and didn't have the words for it. Come back Saturday, Maddie said, for the meal. Clara blinked. You even now? Especially now, Maddie said. The sign says every chair is for someone. That includes you. Clara left. Caleb waited until the sound of hooves faded down the road. Then he looked at Maddie. You're giving Eleanor a chance to walk away clean, he said. Cleanish, Maddie said. She still owes what she owes. Gerald will have the real number. She'll pay it. She picked up the ledger. But I'm not interested in destroying a family for sport. I'm interested in being paid what's mine and living on my own land in peace. He looked at her for a long moment. That's a generous call, he said. No, she said. It's a free one. I'm not thinking about Eleanor Carter anymore. I'm thinking about June Pratt and her 3 children on Saturday. I'm thinking about Will Garrett and whether he'll want the stew or the bacon hash. I'm thinking about what I want to build here. She set the ledger on the shelf beside her grandmother's recipe tin. Eleanor gets to live with what she did, Maddie said. That's enough punishment for anyone. So, Eleanor paid. Not all at once. A woman of Eleanor's pride did not do anything all at once when she could find a way to make it look deliberate, but within 10 days of Gerald Phelps receiving the real ledger, the full accounting was settled. The number was $912. Gerald held it in account as Maddie had asked. She was not in the room when it was paid. She did not want to be. She wanted nothing from Eleanor Carter that required being in the same room. What she wanted was exactly what she had. Her table, her kitchen, her 40 acres, and the creek running behind the house the way her grandmother had always said it should run, working for the person whose land it crossed. Saturday came. June Pratt arrived with all 3 children, as Maddie had said. The oldest was 10, a girl with her mother's careful eyes. The youngest was 4, small and shy, who hid behind June's skirt until the smell of fresh bread became more compelling than shyness, which took about 45 seconds. Maddie brought him a biscuit first. Separate from the meal just a biscuit warm with butter worked into it while it was still hot from the fire. The boy took it in both hands. He looked at it. He took a bite. Then he looked up at Maddie with the expression that only a very young child can produce: absolute, unguarded wonder, the expression of someone encountering something so good they have no category for it yet. "Good?" Maddie asked. He nodded so hard his hat fell off. June Pratt pressed her hand to her mouth. She looked at Maddie over the child's head, and Maddie looked back at her, and nothing needed to be said. That was the moment Caleb Rourke, coming through the front door with a bundle of firewood for the hearth, stopped and looked at the room, at the full table, at the child, with the biscuit, at June Pratt's face, at Maddie, standing in the middle of all of it, like she had been there her entire life, which in every way that mattered, she had. He set the wood down quietly by the hearth. He caught Maddie's eye across the room. She gave him the smallest nod, not a performance, just acknowledgement. This is what I meant." He nodded back, and he went outside to split more wood because there would be more people tomorrow, and the day after that, and the fire needed to be ready. The eating house had been open 6 weeks when the letter arrived from Cheyenne. Maddie found it on the porch in the morning, left by whoever had ridden through from town, and the return address on the envelope was a law office she didn't recognize, Harlan and Beach Attorneys at Law, with a Cheyenne address printed in careful block letters. She stood on the porch in her apron with the envelope in both hands and felt the particular cold that comes when something you thought was settled turns out not to be. She opened it at the kitchen table before the fire was built, before the bread was started, before Caleb came around from the barn. She read it twice. Then she sat very still for a moment. Then she read it a third time, because the third time confirmed what she'd understood on the first, and refused to believe on the second. Margaret Bell. Her grandmother had retained a Cheyenne attorney in the last year of her life. Not just for the deed, for everything. There was a second document not hidden under a hearthstone, but filed properly in Cheyenne, where Eleanor Carter had no access to. It had never known to look a full estate declaration naming Martha Bell Carter as sole heir to Margaret Bell's personal assets. Assets that had been held in trust by Harlan and Beach for 11 years, waiting for the heir to come forward with proof of identity. The letter listed the assets. The sum was not enormous, but it was real. Cash holdings from the sale of Margaret Bell's cattle in the year before her death, timber rights proceeds from the mountain section she had once leased herself, and the contents of a small savings account at a Cheyenne bank that had been accruing interest for 11 years at a rate that had made it considerably larger than it started. At the bottom of the letter, "We have been attempting to locate Miss Martha Bell Carter since 1876. We were directed to your current address by the Laramie County Land Office following a recent deed correction filed in your name. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange transfer of the estate." Maddie set the letter down on the table. She pressed both palms flat against the wood the way she had pressed them against Gerald Phelps's desk the morning she put her grandmother's deed down and said that ends today. Same table, same hands, different weight entirely. Her grandmother had been trying to reach her from beyond the grave for 11 years, and Eleanor had blocked every road. Caleb found her still sitting at the table when he came in with the morning wood, and he read her face the way he had learned to read it over 6 weeks of proximity. Not intrusively, not with a flood of questions, but with that particular stillness of a man who understands the difference between a person who needs to talk and a person who needs a moment first. He built the fire. He put the coffee on. He sat down across from her and waited. She pushed the letter across the table. He read it, all the way through, careful and complete. Then he set it down and looked at her. 11 years, she said. Yes, he said. She filed this in Cheyenne specifically because she knew Eleanor would intercept anything local. Maddie's voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. She did everything right. She filed the deed. She retained an attorney. She wrote the letters and hid them where I'd find them. She did everything a woman could do to make sure I was taken care of. Her throat tightened. And Eleanor still managed to swallow up 11 years of it. She didn't swallow the trust, Caleb said. Your grandmother put that where Eleanor couldn't reach it. She put it so far out of reach, Maddie said, that I didn't know it existed. You know now, he said. She looked at the letter. It changes things. The amount in that account, it's enough to properly outfit the eating house. Build the second room I've been putting off. Dig the second well on the north end for the garden. She paused. Hire help. He raised an eyebrow slightly. June Pratt, she said. She needs steady work. She can cook not the way I cook, but she can manage a morning service without me standing over her. I can't run this alone through harvest season, and I've been too proud to say so. He looked at her for a moment. That's not pride. You've been managing on your own so long you forgot it was allowed to ask. She looked at him. The accuracy of it landed somewhere it was supposed to. I'm asking now, she said. Is that better? Considerably, he said. She folded the letter carefully and put it in the pocket inside her dress beside where she'd carried the deed the morning she walked into Gerald Phelps' office. Different document. Same pocket. Same act of claiming. I'm going to Cheyenne, she said. He nodded. When? End of the week. I'll need 2 days there to meet with the attorneys and sign the transfer documents. She paused. I've never been to Cheyenne. It's a big town, he said. Loud, moves fast. I'll manage, she said. I know you will, he said. I'll come with you. She looked at him. Not to manage anything, he said before she could speak. Just to be there. If you want company. She held his gaze for a moment. 6 weeks ago, she would have said no automatically, would have said, I don't need help, because that was the reflex she'd built over 12 years of needing help she wasn't allowed to ask for. She was getting better at catching that reflex before it got all the way out. I'd like company, she said. He nodded once. Then we'll go Friday. The bread wasn't going to start itself. She got up and went to the kitchen, and the morning began. June Pratt said yes before Maddie finished the sentence. She came on Tuesday, as she had every Saturday since the first one, and Maddie told her about the Cheyenne trip, and the attorneys, and the estate. And then she told her what she'd been thinking about steady work. And June sat at the kitchen table, with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and listened with the careful attention of a woman who has learned to wait for the part where the good thing gets taken back. It didn't get taken back. You'd be here mornings, Maddie said. Bread and the morning meal. I'll teach you my methods not all at once, gradually, and you'd work alongside me until you know the kitchen well enough to manage a service on your own. She named a wage. Weekly, on the week. June looked at the table, then at the fire, then at Maddie. Why me? She asked. Because you can cook, Maddie said, and because you need steady work, and because I watched you cut bread last Saturday the way a person cuts bread when they've been doing it since they were young and they understand what they're doing. She paused. And because you have 3 children who will be better off with a mother who isn't calculating whether this week's laundry pays for next week's flour. June's jaw worked. I won't be a charity case, she said, for the second time. The same words as the first time 3 weeks ago outside the dry goods store. I know, Maddie said. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a job because I need one filled, and you're the right person for it. That's a business decision, Mrs. Pratt, not a kindness. June looked at her for a long time. June, she said finally. If we're going to work together, you ought to call me June. June, Maddie said. Can you start Thursday? I can start tomorrow, June said. She started Wednesday. The first morning was careful and quiet. 2 women finding the rhythm of a shared kitchen, the particular negotiation of space and habit and method that happens when someone new comes into a kitchen that has already learned itself. Maddie showed her the fire first, the way her grandmother had shown her. This is how you build it to last. This is how you read it. This is when it's ready, and this is when it's lying to you. June listened with her whole body, The way a person listens when they know they're being given something real. By the second morning, they had stopped bumping into each other. By the third, they were talking not about anything consequential at first, just the quiet talk of shared work, the kind of conversation that happens over dough and coffee. But it moved the way talk does when two people are both honest. "Did you know her?" June asked. "About Margaret Bell." Because she had heard the story the way everyone in the county now had some version of it, and she was curious about the woman underneath the story. "She was everything," Maddie said. "When I was with her, I never once felt like too much, and then she died, and I spent 12 years being told I was." June rolled the dough without speaking for a moment. "People do that," she said. "Make you smaller so they can feel bigger. My husband's brother tried it after Samuel passed. Told me I wouldn't manage. Told the children I wasn't reliable." She pressed the dough down. "I managed." "You're here," Maddie said. "I'm here," June agreed. Friday morning came, and Maddie and Caleb rode to Cheyenne. The meeting with Harlan and Beach took most of the first day. The senior attorney, a dry, precise man named Mr. Harlan, who had the manner of someone who had spent 40 years dealing with complicated estates, and had long since stopped being surprised by anything families did to each other, walked Maddie through the full transfer with careful thoroughness. He apologized in the measured way lawyers apologize for things they were not personally responsible for the 11-year delay in locating her. He explained that they had sent letters to the Carter Ranch address 3 times over the years, all of which had apparently gone unanswered. "Unanswered," Maddie said. "That is what our records show," Mr. Harlan said. Caleb, sitting beside her, said nothing. Maddie looked at the stack of documents in front of her, 11 years of correspondence that had been sent to a house where Eleanor Carter sorted the mail, and felt something move through her that was not quite anger and not quite grief, and was probably both of them pressed together until they became something new. "Mr. Harlan," she said, "my grandmother retained you specifically because she trusted you to make sure this reached me." "That is correct," he said. "She was a very deliberate woman. She said—" He opened a folder. "I have her words here if you want them." "I want them," Maddie said. He read, "My granddaughter Maddie is the kind of woman who will find her way to the right place eventually. She may take longer than she should because the people around her will work to keep her turned around. But she will get there. When she does, give her everything I saved and tell her I was not worried." Maddie's eyes did a thing she had been working to prevent for 6 weeks. She let them. Just for a moment, just sitting in a lawyer's office in Cheyenne with her hands in her lap and her grandmother's words in the air, she let her eyes do what they needed to do. Then she straightened, picked up the pen, signed every document he put in front of her. When they left the office, Caleb did not say anything for half a block. He walked beside her in the Cheyenne afternoon, louder and faster than Wyoming ranch country full of strangers and wagons, and the particular energy of a city that had convinced itself it was in a hurry. And then he said quietly, "She was right, you know." "About what?" Maddie said. "She said she wasn't worried." He glanced at her. "She knew you." Maddie pressed her lips together. "She knew who I could be," she said. "It took me longer to know it." "That's usually how it works," he said. They ate supper at a Cheyenne restaurant that charged 4 times what Maddie charged for a considerably worse meal, which she noted with professional displeasure. And Caleb ate everything on his plate without complaint because he was not a complicated man about food. And he seemed to find her displeasure about the quality amusing in a way he was careful not to show directly. "It's not funny," she said. "No, ma'am," he said in the tone of a man working hard. "The gravy is flour and water and optimism," she said. He set his fork down and looked at the ceiling briefly. "Stop it," she said, and something happened in her chest that she had almost forgotten was possible. A genuine laugh rising without permission, the kind that can't be performed because it arrives before you can decide about it. He laughed too. It was the first time she had heard him laugh fully. Not the brief, quiet thing he kept for small moments, but a real one, and it changed his face into something younger and unguarded, and she found she wanted to see it again. They rode back Saturday morning. The eating house was open when they arrived. June had managed the morning service alone, 12 people according to the tally she had kept on the small board. Maddie had hung by the kitchen door for exactly this purpose, and the fire was still going, and the kitchen was clean, and June was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, wearing the expression of a woman who has just proved something to herself. "How was it?" Maddie asked. "Will Garrett tried to ask for a second breadbasket before everyone else had their first," June said. "I told him to wait his turn." "Good," Maddie said. "He waited," June said. "And then he said it was the best meal he'd had since your first day open and asked if you were hiring." Maddie looked at her. "What did you tell him?" "I told him we were fully staffed," June said with the particular satisfaction of a woman using "we" for the first time and finding it fit correctly. Captain Guotong. The twist that Maddie had not seen coming arrived on a Sunday, which was the one day the eating house didn't open, and it arrived in the form of Clara Carter on the brown mare she'd been riding since the day she brought the ledger, and this time Clara was not alone. The woman with her was older 60, maybe 65, with a face that had been through considerable weather and a bearing that said she was accustomed to being taken seriously. She dismounted with the efficiency of someone who had been riding long before anyone thought to make it comfortable. "Maddie Bell Carter," she said. "Yes," Maddie said. "My name is Agnes Whitmore. I'm the chairwoman of the Laramie County Women's Aid Society." She said it the way someone states a fact that is also a credential. "I've been hearing about what you've done here for 3 weeks from approximately 14 different sources. I don't usually need 14 sources to get my attention. You managed it in 2. She looked at the sign above the door. "I want to talk to you about a proposal." Maddie stepped back. "Come in." Agnes Whitmore came in, sat at the table, accepted coffee, and laid out her proposal with the efficiency of a woman who had been making proposals for 40 years and had long since stopped wasting anyone's time with preamble. The Women's Aid Society ran a fund for widows and families in crisis across 3 counties. They had money, not enormous amounts, but steady from church collections and the occasional bequest, and they had need which was always larger than the money. What they did not have was a reliable place to direct women who needed immediate practical help, a meal, a safe table, a room to sit in. That wasn't the street or the shelter at the church that smelled of mildew and judgment. "I want to put the Bell Eating House on our referral list," Agnes said. "Any woman we direct to you for a meal. Aid Society covers the cost directly. You're reimbursed weekly. You set the terms." Maddie looked at her. "You've been running this society for how long?" 19 years, Agnes said. "And you've never had a referral arrangement with a kitchen before." "There's never been a kitchen like this before," Agnes said. She looked around the room at the bench Caleb had built wide enough for any person who sat on it. At the table, solid and long. At the sign visible through the open door. Most kitchens feed people who can pay. You feed people who show up. She met Maddie's eyes. "That's rarer than it ought to be." Maddie thought about June Pratt outside the dry goods store with her careful eyes and her, "I wouldn't want charity." About the 4-year-old boy and the biscuit, and the expression that had no category for something that good. About her grandmother's letter feeding people is not a small thing. It is the most direct way one person can tell another you are worth taking care of. "I'll need it in writing," Maddie said. "Clear terms. I set the menu and the schedule. The society doesn't direct my kitchen, only provides payment for covered guests." "Agreed," Agnes said without hesitation. "And I want June Pratt's wages included in the weekly reimbursement when she's serving covered guests. Her work is part of the service." Agnes looked at her. Something moved in the older woman's expression, approval measured and real. "Agreed," she said again. They shook hands across the table. Clara, who had said nothing throughout, was watching Maddie with an expression that had been building since the day she handed over the ledger, something that had started as guilt and moved through accountability and was now settling into something quieter. Respect, maybe. The kind that doesn't announce itself. When Agnes went outside to look at the kitchen garden, Maddie was planning for the north end. Clara stayed at the table. "I'm leaving the Carter house," Clara said. Maddie looked at her. "Not immediately. I don't have anywhere to go immediately." She kept her voice even. "But I can't. I can't keep living the way Mama lives. Looking at everything as something to be managed. Looking at people as things to be useful or gotten around." She paused. "I've been watching you for 6 weeks. The way you run this place. The way you talk to June. The way you talked to that widow outside the dry goods." She stopped. "I want to learn to do something real. I don't know how to do anything real." Maddie considered her. "Can you carry a full service tray without dropping it?" she asked. Clara blinked. No. "Can you cut bread evenly?" "Not particularly." "Can you smile at a tired ranch hand at 6 in the morning and mean it?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "I could learn," she said. Maddie looked at her for a long time. This was Eleanor's daughter. The girl who had watched and said nothing for 12 years. The woman who had finally, when it cost her something, chosen differently. "Come Wednesday," Maddie said. "We start at 5. Bring shoes you don't mind ruining." Clara exhaled. "Thank you, Maddie." "Don't thank me yet," Maddie said. "June runs the morning and she doesn't tolerate complaining." October came in on a warm wind that hadn't decided to be autumn yet. The kind of Wyoming October that gave you 2 good weeks before it turned cold and meant it. The eating house had been open 4 months. The second room was framed and half finished. Caleb had started it the week Maddie received the Cheyenne estate transfer, working mornings before the service started, and it was taking shape the way everything he built took shape, solid and without excess. On a Thursday evening, after the last guest had gone, and June had taken her children home, and Clara had ridden back to the Carter house to collect another armful of her things, Maddie was at the table with the account book. Not worried, she had not had a losing week since the third one, and the Aid Society arrangement had stabilized everything further, just accounting. Knowing exactly where she stood, she heard Caleb on the porch. She always heard him on the porch. He moved quietly for a large man, but the boards knew his weight. He came through the door with something in his arms she didn't immediately place. Something wrapped in canvas, not large, the size of a chair seat. He set it on the table. "I've been working on this," he said, "since August." She looked at the canvas, then at him. "Open it," he said. She unwrapped it. It was a chair, not a simple one. He had taken time with it, real time, the kind that shows in every joint and surface. Wide enough that nobody would ever look at it and wonder if it would hold. The wood was smooth, sanded down to something that felt like it had been that way always. The back was curved to actually support the person sitting in it. At the top of the back, carved into the wood, in careful letters, she recognized as the same hand that had lettered the sign frame, M.B.C. Martha Bell Carter. Maddie ran her fingers across the letters. She could not speak for a moment. "It goes at the head of your table," he said, "where the owner sits." She looked up at him. "You made this?" "Over August and September," he said. "Evenings mostly, when the service was done." He held her gaze. "You've been running this table for 4 months from the side seat. That's where the cook stands, not where the owner sits." He paused. "You're both Maddie. You ought to sit where both belong." She looked at the chair, at the letters, at the curve of the back and the width of the seat, and the fact that he had built it to hold her specifically, had made it exactly right, had not asked her size or her preferences, but had simply paid attention, the way he paid attention to everything, quietly, completely, without making a performance of it. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah." She looked up at him. He was standing 3 feet away with his hat in his hands, and for the first time in 6 months, she saw something in his face that was not the practiced steadiness he kept. For everything, something underneath it, something that had been there since a summer evening in a dusty yard when he sat on the ground beside a feed crate and asked what she'd put in the gravy. "Sit down," she said. He sat, across the table from her in the chair he'd been using since August, the ordinary one. She put her hands on the table between them, not reaching, just placing them there open. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need to say it plainly, because that's the only way I know how to say things that matter." He waited. "I have spent 27 years being told I was too much," she said. "Too heavy, too plain, too much trouble, not enough of the right things. I believed most of it for a long time. Not all of it, but enough that when someone looked at me and actually saw me, I kept waiting for the part where they took it back." He did not look away. "You haven't taken it back," she said. "No," he said. "I haven't. I don't know what to do with that yet," she said honestly. I'm still learning what it feels like to stand on my own ground without waiting for someone to come and tell me I'm standing wrong." She paused. "But I know what I feel when you're here. And I know what I feel when you're not. And they're different enough that it seemed worth saying." Caleb Rourke was not a man who moved fast in any direction, but he reached across the table and put one hand over both of hers, not grasping, not pulling, just covering them the way you cover something you want to protect from the cold. "I've been alone a long time," he said. "On purpose. It was easier than the alternative." His thumb moved once across her knuckles. "Then I rode into a yard and found the best cook in Wyoming eating alone in the dust, and I figured the alone part might be finished." She looked at his hand over hers. "I'm not an easy woman," she said. "I know it," he said. "I don't want easy. I have a business to run, and an estate to settle, and a second room to finish building, and a women's aid society arrangement to honor, and June Pratt's wages to meet every week." "I know all of that," he said. "And I'm not going to be managed," she said. "Not by anyone. Not ever again. Maddie." His voice was very quiet. "The last thing on earth I want to do is manage you." She looked at him for a long moment. At the face she had been looking at for 4 months' steady, unhurried present. The face of a man who had sat in the dirt because it was the right thing to do and had never once required her to be grateful for it. "All right," she said. He didn't ask what she meant. He understood the way he understood most things completely, without needing it explained. His hand stayed over hers. The second room opened in November. 6 more chairs. 1 longer table. The Aid Society sent 4 women in the first week, and Maddie fed them all, and June managed the Tuesday morning service alone for the first time, without Maddie in the kitchen, and not one thing was dropped or burned or served wrong. Clara Carter had become, against everyone's prediction, including her own, a competent and reliable presence at the morning table. Not yet a cook, not by a distance, but a woman who smiled at tired ranch hands at 6 in the morning and meant it, which turned out to be more than half the job. Eleanor Carter paid her debt and did not come to the eating house. The county talked about it for a while and then moved on to other things the way counties do. Caleb came down from the mountain in October and did not go back up. He did not announce this. He simply stopped leaving. He kept his bedroll in the barn for another 3 weeks out of respect for forms, and then one evening, Maddie came out to tell him supper was ready and found him reading by the barn lantern, and she stood in the doorway and said, "You can eat inside, you know. You don't have to take your plate to the barn." He looked up. She held his gaze. He put the book down and came inside. He sat at the table in his chair, and she sat at the head in hers, in the wide, smooth carved chair that had waited for her since August. And they ate the meal she had made, and the fire went in the hearth, and the creek ran behind the house, the way it had run since her grandmother dug the channel with her own hands, and the sign above the door read, what it had always read, in deep red paint that had not faded. "Every chair is for someone." Maddie Bell Carter had cooked for 12 years in a house that wasn't hers, eaten in the yard, like she didn't deserve a seat, been told. Her body was too much, and her value was too little, and her land wasn't worth visiting, and her grandmother's letters weren't worth delivering. She had lost none of those years. She carried them the way a woman carries the things that shaped her, not as wounds to perform, but as knowledge. Hard knowledge, earned knowledge, the kind that lives in the hands and the spine and the part of the chest that knows the difference between being seen and being managed. She sat at the head of her own table, in her own house, on her own 40 acres, with the spring creek running and the fire going, and the man she had chosen. Not the man who rescued her, but the man who sat down beside her in the dust, and asked what she'd put in the gravy, sitting across from her like he had always been there. She had built this. Every chair, every table, every loaf of bread and bowl of stew and early morning fire. Every choice that said, I am worth taking care of, when 12 years of living had worked hard to convince her otherwise. Her grandmother had not been worried. She had been right not to be. Maddie Bell Carter was home, and she was staying, and every chair at her table was full.